You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Hristodoulou.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and today we continue on ranking the offenses of the NFL within their divisions with none other than the NFC East, a division that is chock full of bitter rivalries, very competitive matchups, and plenty of discussion points for a division that has a lot of turnover going on right now within each and every single team, whether it's coaches leaving, players leaving, teams being successful and having to lose players or bringing in new players, maybe new quarterbacks leading the way for them. There's so much to discuss regarding the NFC East, and this is one of the divisions that, as I'm prepping this and getting ready to do it, I am kind of I'm sitting there a little bit nervously putting it together because I know how rabid the fans can be at times when they don't like what they hear. So please take it easy on me, to all of you, if you don't like what I have to say. But without further ado, comment down below. I'd love to hear your rankings within the NFC East. How would you rate all four of these teams' offenses from worst to first? Give me your reasons why. Do you agree with, disagree with what I have to say? Would love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Now, diving right into the thick of things, we begin with the number 4 team first, a team that has a lot changing for them this year, a new offensive coordinator, a new quarterback, and I am looking right at the Washington Commanders at the number 4 spot. For me, there's just too much changing in some pretty important spots for me to truly buy into what they're doing. I'm not saying they can't be successful because there are some good things I will talk about here in a second, but with a new offensive coordinator coming in and somewhat of an unknown with quarterback Sam Howell and what we are going to get from him, I just don't quite know if I can put them any higher than number 4 at this very moment. My biggest question, of course, being, can Sam Howell be that guy and lead the offense of offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy, who is also the assistant head coach? I think it's going to take a massive effort from not only him, but Ron Rivera, their quarterbacks coach, to Vita Pritchard. They have to do everything within their power to maximize his talent, his ability, and just push him to his absolute limits and see what they can get out of Sam Howell if they truly believe that he is their guy. Keep the passing game very quick, rely on your running game. You have a couple of good running backs, and we'll talk about them in a second, but you have some awesome wide receivers as well. There are a lot of pieces to allow for a really good recipe of success in Washington, but having such a big unknown at the quarterback spot, and now Eric Bieniemy is kind of in a prove-it situation where he's struggling to find himself a head coaching gig now for the last few years, and him coming to Washington is supposed to help him find that spot. So this is big. There's a lot of really good things surrounding Sam Howell. It's just a matter of, can they put it all together and make it successful? And like I mentioned, establishing the run and playing through 2 really good running backs that you have over there in both Brian Robinson, who last year, coming back after getting shot twice during the preseason, he was able to come back, had an excellent, I would say, stretch of games following the entire situation that he had. And I think after being, now we're looking at almost a year removed from that whole situation, I think that we're going to see even more from him. On the 200 carries he had last year, he averaged about 3.9 yards per carry, which is definitely solid. He had 797 yards, a couple of touchdowns as well. Then you, of course, have running back Antonio Gibson, who had about 150 touches himself last year, 546 yards on the ground, and 3 touchdowns as well. I think you want to rely on these 2 guys as a 1-2 punch to kind of take the pressure off of Sam Howell. You don't want him to have to be thrown into the fire and just put this team on his back. Maybe that works for him, but in most cases, we've seen strong running games really help out young quarterbacks that are early on in their career, just trying to figure things out and get their feet wet within the league. So I think having a solid ground game will be important. And for them to do that, they need that offensive line to continue to build off what they did last season. Now, last year in the running game, 126 yards per game rushing. That was good for 12th in the NFL. Solid. You're in the top half of the NFL. Your goal should be to try to push that a little bit further, creep your way maybe into the top half, even if you're within 9, 8, 7, somewhere along those lines. That would be ideal for Sam Howell's growth as a young quarterback. But the real concern that I'm having with this offensive line isn't what they're doing in the run, but more so just how they are able to protect Sam Howell. Not necessarily the greatest in terms of pass protection last year. They had 49 sacks altogether. They were 7th most in the NFL. And when you look at kind of some of the changes that we're going to see here now, they went and brought in right tackle Andrew Wiley. While that's a great upgrade, I would say, on the right side, pass protection issues still a bit of a concern. PFF credited him for 9 sacks allowed last season, so that's not great. And then you, of course, have left tackle Charles Leno, who's been solid, but last year he was credited for 8 sacks again by PFF. And then you have a left guard that's currently projected to be your starter in Chris Paul, 7th-round pick from last year. That's what I believe our lads had. I think PFF had him listed there as well. Obviously, that could potentially change between now and the season, but we're just going off projections right now. But if he is your guy, he only has 66 snaps played last year, so kind of a relative unknown with what's going to happen there. So you have some concerns regarding pass protection with guys that are already on the line, some new people coming in, people getting opportunities. If they can protect Sam Howell, you can at least make things easier for him. And again, establishing the run will be key. Take the pressure off his shoulders. Give him somewhat better protection. If you can get yourself within like the top half of the league, that would be ideal in terms of sacks and pressure allowed. But overall, just a lot of questions and not too many answers from the Commanders, at least at this very moment. But again, you do have some really good talent. Running back room is strong. Wide receivers, I don't really know if I have to mention it, but you have Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel. You have a really good trio of guys to be catching the football from. So I'm excited about the potential of this offense. It's just more of like I need to kind of see. Going into the number 3 team, though, here, a lot of decision making for as to how I was going to put around like the middle 2 teams here and what I thought about them. But ultimately, I think right now, a similar situation, some questions, but I've already seen some proof in the pudding. I just feel like I need to see a little bit more like consistency, and that's going to be from the New York Football Giants at the number 3 spot here. So we'll start with quarterback Daniel Jones. Obviously, last season showed massive improvement with protecting the football. He had only 5 interceptions. He dropped the football 6 times. Excellent numbers from him in terms of his career numbers, by far career best when it came to protecting the football, but he only had 22 touchdowns in 2022, and I would like to see that number get pushed towards like 30 to 35. I want him to be a quarterback that you can ride and die with. I feel like that's what you kind of need in the NFL right now. Like, yes, it's kind of nice to have a really strong running game, and you have a running back in Saquon Barkley, and we'll get into that in a second, but I would like to see Daniel Jones really come into his own. He's getting paid now about $40 million per year, which is somewhat of a bargain considering what some of the top-end quarterbacks are making. But if you're paying him $40 million per year, you want to see him putting up 30 touchdowns or so or more. And I'm not necessarily saying passing or a combination of the two, whether it's passing and rushing. Just get me 30 touchdowns however way you can. If you are their guy and their leader, you should be a huge piece and largely responsible for those points that are getting put up on the board. I don't want to see you getting bailed out because Saquon Barkley's having another strong season. I want you to be a complement to Saquon Barkley and not only have dominance in the running game, but also be able to rely on Daniel Jones to get you those points on the board when needed. As far as the wide receiver room goes, this is probably, I would say, the weakest in the division right now, more so because there's just newer pieces, some guys that I'm kind of curious as to why they hung on to, and we just kind of need to see more from the group altogether. There is a lot of potential upside, though, and I'll start by talking about Isaiah Hodgins and Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton, a few years ago, I was a really big fan of him, and when, he was catching on strong his rookie year, I thought, okay, this is like a legit guy that's going to break out and be a star for the Giants. Hasn't quite reached that potential yet, but I think with his ability just in terms of athleticism and what he can do with the ball in his hands, coupled with Isaiah Hodgins, who is somebody that got brought over by Brian Daboll from Buffalo into New York during last season. I think you have a good couple of guys that you can start to build your wide receiver core around. Then you have Paris Campbell, and I am a Colts fan, so I feel like I can come from a little more experience with him as a fan of the Colts. But if he can stay healthy, he is a burner. But that if he can stay healthy thing is a big question. But I will say that I did like what I was seeing from him and Matt Ryan last season. It was probably one of of the few lone bright spots of the passing game. Although it didn't come in large amounts, I'm curious to see how Paris Campbell does in a change of scenery with a guy like Sam Howell, who's not afraid to toss the ball all the way down the field, and he has a cannon for an arm. He can make those big throws all the way down the field. So I'll be excited to see what can work out there. Then there's, of course, Wandale Robinson, tripping over my tongue there, coming back from a torn ACL. We'll have to see if he can get back his pop and his explosive ability. And then there's Tennessee wide receiver Jalen Hyatt, the rookie that you brought in this offseason, someone I'm really excited to watch grow in this offense with Brian Daboll. He's somebody that a lot of people need to be taking note of. And then there's Sterling Shepard, who is back again. And I honestly did not expect this one when the re-signing happened during the offseason. He's just been injured so much the last handful of years, but he came back on a relatively cheap deal, so it's good to have that veteran leadership in a otherwise fairly young wide receiver room, I would say. So maybe that's part of the reason why. Maybe they just really like Sterling Shepard, and maybe he does contribute some, but I mean, he's at this point, I believe he's 30 years old or he's getting close to it, one of those two, and it's not like he's going to get any younger, so bit of a head scratcher, but the veteran leadership should be good for that wide receiver room altogether. And then lastly, running back Saquon Barkley, as I've mentioned here and there. Obviously, the big question right now is what is going to happen with Saquon Barkley. You have the rumor mill swirling about maybe him holding out, which I really hope that is not the case. He came off a year where he had 1,650 yards on the dot altogether total between the ground and through the air. He had 10 rushing touchdowns. You need to figure out how to get him locked up and get him happy so he's on the football field making a difference for you. I think that this offense will not function nearly as well as it did last year for what it did do without Saquon Barkley. He is a star. I know he's been dealing with injuries the last couple of years, but clearly now bouncing back last year, I think coming in healthy, he could go for even more than just the 1,650 he put up last year, maybe push beyond that 10 touchdown mark. He's somebody that as long as you can just get him locked up, get him the money that he feels he deserves, or at least try to come to somewhat of a compromise. I know that there's been some frustrations from Barkley's camp, and the Giants have just kind of stayed somewhat firm on what their price is, and the running back situation right now in terms of money throughout the league is not necessarily the greatest. I feel like running backs are just like a dime. A lot of people feel like they're a dime a dozen right now, but Saquon Barkley's special. I don't think he's one of those dime a dozen guys. He is someone that you're going to plug in and he's going to be a difference maker, and defenses will have to commit an extra man or two in the box to worry about what he can do to you if you are not stacking that box. So get him signed up, but altogether, like I said, weakest wide receiver group, I would say, in my opinion, in the NFC East right now. You, of course, have Daniel Jones coming off of, I would say, his best season so far as a quarterback. Hopefully, he can continue to build off that, but I'd like to see some more production from him in the touchdown department. And then with Saquon Barkley, I just hope things don't get uglier. I'm hoping that it gets better, but with all that in mind, I like the Giants at 3. Then diving into the number 2 spot, and this is where things always get fun because you get to number 2 and everyone's just waiting on number 1 and why I have them at 1 and why I put this team at number 2. But at the number 2 spot here, after much deliberation, I am going to go with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, we'll start with the running back room here. So Ezekiel Elliott, gone from the team. I'm going to say I've been a big Tony Pollard guy for a while now. I honestly have been pounding the table for him to get the starting role as running back 1 for this team for at least the last year and a half. I just feel like every time he's been in, he's shown flashes. He's been very consistent. He has a career average of 5.1 yards per attempt. He only has 3 fumbles on 510 total career carries. This is a guy that I really think you can rely on as your running back 1, and my thoughts have finally been proven by the Cowboys moving on from Zeke and the money that they were paying him to now going all in on Tony Pollard being their lead running back. You have a pretty solid offensive line still. You have one of the best, if not the best, offensive guards in Zach Martin. You have second-year guard Tyler Smith as well, and if Tyron Smith can stay healthy, you have a pretty strong offensive line. I'm not too concerned about the running game here. It's more or less just going to be the changes within the scheme and how things are going to look for the offense since they moved on from Kellen Moore, and now you're looking at new offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer. With him coming in now, it's up to him to be able to maximize Dak Prescott's ability. On top of that, a wide receiver room that added Brandon Cooks this offseason. You, of course, have CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup. I really like CeeDee Lamb. I think he is one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. Brandon Cooks is like the most consistent 1,000-yard receiver that does not get the love I think he deserves. You have Michael Gallup, who's another guy who I think is very talented, and when they opted to keep him last year, and move on from Amari Cooper. Wasn't too surprised about that situation, considering money's obviously going to come to a head at some point here, and someone has to be the odd man out. So it was Amari Cooper. Michael Gallup, talented guy, was just coming off of an injury, but I'm not surprised he's still around at this point. And then as a USFL fan, I would really like to see them give someone like Kevontae Turpin maybe a little bit more time in the passing game. Like, yes, he's the all-pro return guy that you have, but ultimately, I want to see him get involved. As, again, somebody who watched the USFL the last couple of seasons, Kevontae Turpin, MVP of the first season, he was a guy who was making a lot of plays. I know the talent's lesser, but overall, he showed flashes as a route runner, as a true receiver. I mean, there's a lot that he can do. He's got the speed as well. He can create separation. Let's try to get him a little bit more involved. On top of that, you're also looking at, like I mentioned, the running back room. You have Tony Pollard, and then you have 6th-round pick Deuce Vaughn out of Kansas State. A little bit of a wild card for the running back room there. Then 2nd-round pick Michigan tight end Luke Schoonmaker. There are a lot of guys for Brian Schottenheimer to work with here. There was a lot of conversation last season about Kellen Moore's love for the curls and comeback routes and not really stretching the field enough. I think with the amount of skill talent you have and decent amount of speed as well, the biggest thing I want to see from this offense, obviously, don't go all in with Dak Prescott throwing the football 40 plus times a game. Balance things out a little bit. Like I said, I think Tony Pollard can be a legit workhorse running back. Balance out your offense a little bit more, but don't be afraid to really stretch the football field. You have a really good wide receiver core for that. CeeDee Lamb, athletic. Brandon Cooks, he was a big speedster earlier in his career. Obviously getting a little bit older now, but he's still on the younger-ish side, can still burn some guys. Michael Gallup's got the speed again. Kevontae Turpin is a playmaker. And on top of that, you bring in Luke Schoonmaker. There is a lot to like about the talent on this offense. It's just a matter of, can Brian Schottenheimer ultimately put it all together and open up this offense a little bit more? Because that was probably the biggest criticism I saw and this is coming from Cowboys fans that I would read about, is just the curls and comebacks routes were really killing people. So with the big change at the offensive coordinator spot right now, I'm a little bit curious as to how things look for the Cowboys. And again, you moved on from Ezekiel Elliott. You now have Tony Pollard in, and you got a big addition at wide receiver in Brandon Cooks. I'm really excited to see this offense, but I kept him at number 2 for the number 1 team in my divisional rankings here, the Philadelphia Eagles. And I'm just going to start off by saying my biggest reason has got to be player personnel. When you look at this depth chart from top to bottom, it is just filled with talent. And on top of that, you're looking at 8 returning starters to kick things off. This is per OurLads.com with the way their depth charts are set up right now. Again, obviously things can change, but looking at it right now, 8 people from last year's starting team back again starting for you, plus 3 additional guys that you're going to be working with here. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, I would argue, are the best 1-2 punch in the NFL in terms of wide receiver corps. There's obviously guys within that conversation as well, and you're more than likely to fire that down below if you'd like to. But in 2022, they combined for 183 yards. They had 183 receptions, 2,692 yards, and 18 total touchdowns. You also have tight end Dallas Goedert, who has emerged as one of the best tight ends in the NFL right now. In just 12 games, had 55 catches, 702 yards with 3 scores. You'd like to see that number go up a little bit this year. But overall, player personnel-wise, just on the offense, you are deep. From the skill players to your quarterback being outstanding talent, MVP candidate last year in Jalen Hurts, and then you have a solid running back room. The offseason additions will be where you either elevate or kind of stay where you were last year. Rookie Tyler Steen from Alabama is currently listed as the team's starting right guard. Again, this is per Our Lads. I also saw this on PFF as well. Obviously, things could change. Played right tackle in 2019 for Vanderbilt, but left tackle his last 3 seasons in college football. Then another big acquisition was running back DeAndre Swift. This is one where I think you're going to notice a difference in this offense because you're basically swapping out Miles Sanders for DeAndre Swift. I feel like Swift, when he's healthy, offers a lot to you, both in the running game and in the receiving game as a receiver out of the backfield. So if he can stay healthy, I think that this is a fair swap. But Miles Sanders, I think, is one of the more underrated running backs and underappreciated guys in the NFL with what he did for this offense. So it'll be interesting to see if they can get Miles Sanders type production out of DeAndre Swift, but if they can, it should be like a 50-50 trade-off, maybe a little bit of a plus if Swift is really good and really flourishes in this offense here. But I mean, he's averaging 42 yards per game in his career, and he's averaged about 6 touchdowns a season. And they're going to need to see a little bit more to help replace that loss of Miles Sanders. Then another addition here, wide receiver Olamide Zaccheaus, an excellent number 3 option for Philadelphia. He might be able to push wide receiver Quez Watkins, who's had like a flash or two here or there, but has never consistently solidified himself as like that true number 3 guy. He had 40 catches for 500 yards, 3 touchdowns last year, but the thing that stood out for me was his ability to create separation, get himself open, and create chunk plays. He averaged 13.3 yards per reception last year. So obviously, you have some really good additions. The majority of your offense is back, minus a key player here or there that you're replacing with a piece. But the real big question is, how does this offense look? Is it the same team we see last year? Do they improve? Offensive coordinator Brian Johnson has taken over for Shane Steichen, who left for the Indianapolis Colts. He does have some big shoes to fill. Thankfully, he doesn't have to worry about too much because he's pretty much he's been here for a while. He's been the quarterback's coach for the Philadelphia Eagles, so it's not like he's stepping in from somewhere else and learning a whole new system. No, he's been here, so you don't really have to worry about him. He fits right into Nick Sirianni's system, and I think we're not going to really see too much change. If anything, they're just going to try to open up the playbook more and advance the offense even further with another year of this system being established. I'm not really too worried about anything with the Philadelphia Eagles, aside from just can they match the production they had last year again, and can they improve upon it possibly? Those are my only real 2 questions about this team right now. I don't have many doubts about them. So with that, Eagles are number 1. They sit atop the NFC East in my opinion, but I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions down below. Again, comment away. Let me know, what am I getting right? What am I getting wrong? What are your rankings of the NFC East? But that is it for me. If you made it to the end, I appreciate you. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.